We did it. We're here.
It took 22 minutes of fiddling with the technology.
Closer to 40.
Fair. But it's okay.
There's still a distinct possibility that my internet just stops working and I just disappear. I wouldn't rule it out.
This is, that's the podcast game. It's a dangerous game.
What does Luke say about something about the fort? Like, just because someone's gone doesn't mean no one's ever really. I don't remember what he says. Something about people never really being gone. So even if you disappear, Christina, you'll be with us.
Thank you. That was profound. That was really profound.
I don't know. It's okay.
If anything, maybe everyone will just keep watching, stay with us to see if Christina can make it through the whole thing or not. Even if you don't want to see what we have to say.
We will be taking bets in Bitcoin, so you can go ahead and just make
Too
your
soon,
wager.
man.
No?
Too soon.
Okay, sorry.
Oh my goodness.
I
feel like anyone who's familiar with like listening to Emma and me knows that I am always the technological issue in
that's what I said
Pop
to
Culture
them.
Happy Hour. Yeah.
In the 20 minutes we were waiting for you, I was like, this is very normal. This is not.
Well, if it's anything of consolation, Christina, I think you're so much more than a technological issue. I think you're also a psychological issue.
Thank you.
You know, which I can speak into on a professional basis if you would like. I do charge $135 an hour, so just I'll send you an invoice. It's fine.
Welcome to Pop Culture Diagnosis Hour, where
I don't know if I could handle it.
Yeah.
The bill is in the mail. Don't worry.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. What I meant to say was I'm already billing you.
Oh, good.
So
yeah,
you can use that hour or not. I mean, it's your time. It's fine.
You weren't logging into Zencaster. It was the patient portal.
I feel duped.
I was wondering what all those questions about, like whether or not I've been sleeping, have been about.
Yeah. Why did I type my social security number to enter this podcast recording?
Hi, everyone. Look at us. It's all four of us. This is fun.
It's been a while.
Look at us being fun and being friends.
From all four time zones.
Yes.
That's right. That's right. Because Emma's in the one corner of Texas that's not Central Time, and Christian's in the one part of the Mountain Time zone that is sane and doesn't use daylight time. So
we're not going to get political on this podcast.
Listen.
Well, we are talking about Nazis today, so we might get a little. we might have to a little bit.
That's right. Nazis and belly buttons.
Yeah, we're not talking about anything that has to do with Nazis or anything.
But time zones, that can get really heated.
Yeah.
So be careful.
Very divisive. Very divisive. It's really the one thing that's been dividing our country as of late.
I mean, to be honest, I was actually sent an article from a college student on why the East Coast time was the best time zone. So people are out there talking about these things.
Wait,
it's important to somebody.
So is the thesis then, so it's like right now it is 8:55 p.m. Eastern time. Is the idea that it should be 8:55 p.m. for all of you right now? Is that the idea?
You know, I don't think it was trying to make an argument about everyone like being part of this supremacist group, just that there was
Make America group. Greenwich Mean Time again.
Yeah, something like that.
MAGMTA.
Right. It should be midnight in the middle of the day somewhere.
I don't know. Yes. Steve's in that group, so I guess he's the one who has the.
Wait, hold on a second. Don't.
Steve, I can't believe you're a part of this radical group of people who are trying to control time.
I am not a time lord. I'm a master of divinity. Those are very different things.
You're not a master of space and time?
No, the other master of divinity on the call laughed.
That's the dumbest name ever. Sorry.
But yeah, I'm not a. I mean, I'm a New York supremacist insofar as like I think like that snobbery is just endemic to those of us of this particular geographical persuasion. But I'm not an East Coast time. Like you can have your central, have your mountain. Like,
but have you like ever like actually like been to New York though?
What?
I mean, like, I would assume that you've been there if you think it's great.
It's
horrifying.
It's
It's
not
terrifying.
horrifying. It moves
It's a little
fast.
horrifying.
Subway turnstiles can be dangerous sometimes. One can be
Oh.
impaled if one is not being careful.
Homie, I'm an Enneagram 9. Do you know what my spirit animal is?
An otter.
Is this
Sloth.
related to New York? The sloth.
It's a sloth. Like what's a
sloth?
sloth gonna do in New York? I mean, let's write a children's book called like Sloth Stay Out in New York.
I'd read that.
And it was in
What's he
bed
gonna
by
do?
8.
What's he gonna do that day?
The park, the museum.
How's he gonna get there?
Yeah, he'd have to navigate the subway system to get to the park or the
No, he could
subway.
he could go through the skyscrapers, like as if they were trees.
He's not Spider-Man.
This way. We'll put some vines up.
What's he- but apparently they're really good swimmers, so like, we could just flood New York, you know, a la some sort of apocalyptic film, which actually is also the same content of my dreams. And then the sloth would have a great old time in New York.
Wait,
Yeah,
have you ever, on like the outside of the Church of St. John the Divine in New York, there is like a depiction of New York being flooded by a giant wave as part of their apocalypse.
Really?
I like that
Okay.
church.
It's kind of creepy.
He's gonna go like get a Sharpie and like draw a little sloth in there now too. Here he comes.
This is what supremacy gets you, an equal and opposite reaction, right? Here I am talking about how amazing New York is, and all you're wishing is like for it to be submerged by gallons of water.
Yep.
Gallon seems like an understatement, but you know what I mean.
I'm anti-New York. I'll take up that flag. I don't care. I'm anti-New York.
It's like the I heart New York with a line through it.
I don't heart New York.
Just to be clear. I feel like Texans are like their own brand of, Texas is obviously the best, but I feel like it's different than New York, because I feel like New Yorkers they just have like this one little experience and they can't tell you why New York is great because it's clearly gross. But like Texans are like, please come be part of our state that is clearly the best and better than all of the rest of yours.
Well, hold on a second. Like 90% of the people who live here aren't even from here. So there's also that part of it.
Okay.
Everybody's already coming here, but now they left over the past year.
And they realize the
They
grass
realize
is
something.
greener, like actually.
Where there's
Where there's no
actually
income
grass.
tax.
Yeah, where there
Not
is
here, there's no
grass.
grass here.
The grass is greener where there's grass. Correct.
Exactly.
Look, there are pockets on the sidewalk. Dogs have to use the restroom somewhere.
Those pockets are now brown and dead,
Oh, no.
Springtime. It's springtime.
like my soul in New York.
I am a true East Coaster, so I'm with Steve on this one. Even though I've lived in Texas past 2 years, I would take New York any day over Texas.
My, how the turntables have.
What?
Show me office.
Yeah.
So should we do a podcast today? Now that
Yeah.
Now that it's half an hour past when we were supposed to start.
It's okay. It's okay. We got over the existential despair of fighting the elements, fighting the little electrons going through the wires. I don't know how those things work, but either way, we did it. We overcame. So this, like we were saying before, it's our last episode of the season. So we've decided to let our powers combine as we have done in the past. And it's been a while. And we'll do this again when we start the new season sometime in the late spring or early fall. So we will have adventures in technology and scheduling at some point in the future. But for now, yeah, this is it. So I don't know. I mean, like, anybody have any fun follow-up or anything to share as we everybody's been well since we last got together?
Yeah. I don't know.
Peachy keen.
Strained, like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's been raining in Texas for like 2 weeks straight, so I'm kind of done with that. Or at least in my part of Texas. Probably not in Emma's desert corner, but
I mean, to be had. I'm just excited because the school year is ending. While you were trying to figure out your technology stuff, Christina, and you would like magically appear sometimes. I was like, oh, this is like my days at work. Oh, someone's there. Hello. In the darkness.
Welcome to school.
I actually had one of our virtual kids like decide to come in person for the last like month of school, and I was like, okay. So I walked in and I was like, "Do you know who I am?" And he was like, "No." your teacher.
Where have you been?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, my kids just got out of school today. So the craziness that is having them home all the time, all of them, has begun. Yeah.
When does your school year start?
Like second week of August, third week of August.
Ours starts the first week of August and then ends next week still.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well,
that's great.
I don't know.
Well,
But
happy break to your kids.
Yeah, happy break. Happy break to me. Now everyone comes in here all day long and asks for cheese. My favorite.
It's a family tradition.
It is a family tradition. Yes.
You need to tell them to like go write like a musical number so they can they all have to ask it once so you can get it over with. Be like, every time you guys want cheese, just come in together, perform the number, and then you'll get cheese.
Yeah.
I think that's a solid plan. We might try that out this summer.
Unless it's a Wednesday or a Friday because Jesus.
Look
it up.
Part of the lesson. Look it up.
You're the master of divination. I don't want to be the one who teaches you.
Professor Trelawney over here is going to tell us.
Yeah, take it easy, Doc Trelawney.
It's about as legit as that.
Grave danger.
Good old Dr. Trelawney.
Yeah. Well, I mean, now that we've caught up on cheese and family dynamics and so forth, let's say we get into the season finale, huh?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Christian, what are we doing on the season finale of Pop Culture Coffee Hour season, whatever season it is? I lost track.
Yeah, like Affinity. So like the season finale is Life is Beautiful. And Steve, I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to you as you so eloquently can give us a summary of ye old, and I do mean old, Life is Beautiful.
Yeah, so that's actually important for summation purposes because this movie, an Italian movie, came out in 1997. So it is beyond the statute of limitations. If you haven't seen it yet at this point, this is your own fault. You will be spoiled. We're not going to be warning you about this. But this wonderful movie...
But if we were going to warn you with a porg, it would sound like this. Hey, it's me. It's a porg.
Yes. So, Christian and I watched this movie on HBO this week. And for whatever reason, it is available in a very stereotypically dubbed over version, which is basically like they made, they made a Super Mario movie back in the 80s. I don't know if you ever watched this thing. It's basically like, they kind of took that aesthetic for whatever reason, like in terms of the voice acting. It's very like, how can we make this as stereotypical as possible? And just anyway. So came out in 1997. This wonderful movie is about a guy named Guido Orefice, I think is how you would pronounce that last name. Guido. He's a charming man. He woos a woman named Dora with all of his imagination and joy and sort of like wonder. They end up marrying. They have a son, Joshua. And as the movie progresses, right, what starts as this whimsical love story, you kind of realize like, oh, wait a minute, they're in Italy. Wait a minute, they're in like 1930s Italy and stuff is like percolating beneath the surface. And then suddenly you realize that Guido is Jewish and he and his son and his uncle are arrested by the Nazis who have come into town. And Dora actually decides to go with them voluntarily onto the prison car. And the rest of the movie is them in prison and Guido, who's there with his little son, Joshua, who's 5, 6, I would imagine. He's a really little guy. He tries to shelter him from the trauma of being in this prison by making it all into a game. And he says that, if we do the right thing, we will get 1,000 points. And the first person to 1,000 points gets a shiny new tank. And all of this eventually culminates with Guido hiding the son at the very end. The Allies finally come through. Guido gives his life, really shielding his child. But his child does finally see a tank rolling through when the Americans come through. He's reunited with his mom. And then you have this very poignant sort of like brief little voiceover at the very end. And it's actually Joshua telling the story all along. And it wasn't Guido's story. It was Joshua's story, talking about the sacrifice of his father that gave him life in this little dingy box in the midst of a prison camp. I'm going to tear up a little bit as I think about that. So why don't we go to reactions? Like, Christina, what'd you think about this movie?
Sure. So when when we were thinking about what to do for this episode, I think I was the one who suggested this. I really like this film, and I thought, you know, in a time when, I don't know, just felt like the right kind of thing to talk about and to bring back up in our current time, where we either are in the midst of real darkness or perceive that we're in the midst of real darkness. Whatever the case is, I felt like this is a story that really speaks to how, you know, what kind of people we can be in the midst of difficulty. So I'm excited that we're talking about it today.
Yeah, totally. How about you, Christian?
Yeah.
What'd you think?
Yeah, I mean, this movie is a classic, obviously. You know, I remember seeing it for the first time in theaters and being just totally enthralled with it. There's just tons of beautiful ideas, tons of beautiful themes. You brought up, you know, the dubbing on the on the English version. I would say if you have the option, go for the Italian with English subtitles, because it really does feel like watching just this like slightly racist version of a movie when you're like, I think I'm offended, but I'm not even Italian, but like I know people that are, and I don't feel totally comfortable with this portrayal. But yeah, I mean, the movie itself is just top notch.
Totally. Emma?
Yeah, I first watched this movie when I was a senior in high school in my French class, and like we were all like seniors about to graduate, and my teacher like clearly didn't care what happened. And she was like, Italian is close enough to French, and she just like put it on for us. And like we were all like crying by the end of the movie. And since then, I've actually used it in my own classroom. When I taught Night by Elie Wiesel to 8th graders, I showed them the film afterward as kind of like a compare and contrast of Holocaust narratives. So I'm so grateful to my French teacher for showing it to us in Italian, because it's one of my favorite movies. I was so excited when Christina suggested it.
Yeah, super good suggestion in retrospect to revisit this. I think we're all revisiting this movie, right? None of us watched it for the first time. Yeah, I don't even remember the last time that I watched it, but I definitely remember it. It made an impression on me. I think I have just become more of a crier as time has gone on. And like, I did not have a dry eye as I was watching this movie earlier today, actually, because it's really powerful. And yeah, like even Christian, when you were describing it, like you used the word beauty multiple times, because there is something, you know, that the juxtaposition, that tension of the beauty and the darkness, right? To Christina, your point, there's something powerful that this movie, which kind of starts kind of like whimsically, it's almost a comedy, right? Like it's a little bit of a love story, and then it just gets bleak and dark, and like you feel really tragic about it, but yet this sort of sunburst of light, it's heavy sort of light, right? But I mean, there's a lot of resilience and a lot of really wonder and joy that kind of shines through this. So maybe that's the place to start, right? Like the centrality of beauty. So Christian, how should we get going on this topic? Just like it's come up a bunch of times, beauty.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was interesting because I think what really got me starting about this in a particular way was when Emma, kind of offline as we were talking about like doing this movie, she had this interesting question of like, how is it possible that this movie that is filled with so much death and inhumane treatment of other people could be called Life is Beautiful? And like that struck me as a really important question that kind of underpins so much of what goes on in this movie. And I thought about it a lot, but I would love to maybe start a conversation there, just by asking y'all kind of like what maybe your thoughts are on this as to how a movie that has so much death and suffering and darkness could be called something like Life is Beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, Emma, this was your question, so do you want to get us going?
Yeah, well, I think that kind of when Steve was giving the summary and he said that at the end in the final scene, you kind of get this revelation that it's actually Joshua telling the story, is really, for me, where the title comes in, because knowing that it's him telling the story of his father's sacrifice, like to him, his life is beautiful. And it's the whole movie then ends up kind of being like a celebration of Guido, because it's his son telling his story. It's not Guido or some, you know, omniscient narrator giving us this story, but instead it's Joshua celebrating the life of his father. Because even though it is a sad movie and there's a lot of death and darkness and despair, like there are some really funny parts too. Like there are some really light parts, and like they're in this horrible concentration camp, but you're kind of like enjoying it at times. You're like, oh, this is so silly. He's so clever. Like, look how they're getting along so well.
This guy sounds like Mario.
Yeah. Watch the English version. So
the Nazis are Wario, I suppose, in this construction.
Wow.
And the fact that it's like a game and things, I don't know. I think that like there's this sense of not only was Guido's life beautiful because of what he did for his family, but then Joshua and Dora, since they survived, they kind of have a better, maybe a better appreciation for how life can be beautiful, since they've been given the gift of life more so than maybe some of us who haven't gone through something so horrific can feel.
Yeah. And maybe there's that relationship between the beautiful and the horrific. Like beauty sort of in this context is like this emergent thing, like a flower sort of growing out of dirt, right? Like it's the, again, I've used this word multiple times because I don't have a thesaurus on me, so I can't think of another word, right? But sort of whimsy, like the whimsy at the very beginning, which seems kind of like very light and frivolous, takes on a greater depth when the background of this changes. Like when it's just a dude in a village who's wooing a woman, when it's just kind of a happy family, like having a bike ride through town or whatever it is, like it's pleasant and it's light. But like as the backdrop to the movie sort of deepens and darkens, like even that, which becomes reframed in greater resilience and greater like depth of character and greater depth of hope, like the lightness actually becomes deeper and more beautiful. Like it's, again, the flower sort of growing out of the dirt. Like the sense of beauty is like wrapped up inherently in the sense of tragedy.
Right.
At least in this portrayal is my sense.
It makes you not want to take for granted your capacity to wonder, to stand and to, I don't know. I actually really like that you're talking about this whimsy, because I feel like that could be something we could easily dismiss in our like everyday context of someone like that. Like, oh, he doesn't take life seriously. He doesn't really, I don't know. He's not serious about his job. He's not serious about, I don't know, boundaries with a girl he's interested in. There's a lot. He doesn't take very, you could kind of write him off as sort of, I don't know.
Frivolous?
Lost.
Yeah.
Frivolous. Yeah. And it's actually the very thing that we might otherwise think is useless: beauty, wonder, joy, like sort of a capacity for lightness that becomes sort of the heart of his ability to be resilient and survive. A really serious person who could only ever point out the problems in the world and work to fix them might not have had the capacity to survive the experience that he does, and certainly wouldn't have been able to protect his son in the way that Guido does.
Yeah.
I mean, throughout, like for some reason right now, and I don't know why I hadn't even like thought of this prior to this, but just as you all are talking, I think like the phrase that kind of keeps coming to mind, especially now, here we are in like right in light of the risen Lord, is the life-giving cross, which is like this kind of weird paradox, right, of like this instrument of death and torture and suffering as being life-giving. An old like Protestant hymn from the days of my youth, right? Like, oh, the wonderful cross, right? Like this idea of this really horrible thing somehow also being included within the divine economy of beauty is pretty amazing, kind of when we let ourselves reflect on that, right? So it seems to me almost that like divine beauty, our understanding of beauty is not going to be this like perfectly symmetrical look on the bright side kind of thing, but it seems to me that divine beauty has the capacity to include and transform imperfection and darkness, right? Like it has and really when you think about like a beautiful piece of art, like it's not all light, right? Like there's going to be uses of shadow and darkness and all of this kind of stuff to paint a big picture or to create a big mosaic. Like you need the dark tiles as well. And I wonder maybe if that's kind of like what we're going for here, is like the cosmic reality of life. All of life is beautiful. Right. When we include the darkness, when we include the cross, like that is the divine promise. The divine promise is to be able to work all things together for the good of those who love him, including but not limited to the Holocaust. Like who knows what that means. Yeah. But capital L, life is the beautiful, right? And the beauty is life. Like there is, I think, something to that reality, right, of like beauty having to include and transform imperfection and darkness. It has to,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, I
Right.
don't know.
And then to follow that up, and I think this movie really reveals this, it's like you have to have eyes to see and ears to hear, like it's there and you could totally miss it. And Guido is the one who has the eyes to see. He can see life. He can see that cosmic divine beauty that you're talking about. He can see beyond just, I don't know,
Yeah.
the dark versus the light.
And what's wild is that actually does work transformation for his son, right? Like for his son, this really is just a game.
And even those beyond his son, because when you see him first come into their bunk, like they're all just like depressed, down, whatever. Yeah. But then Guido brings so much life beyond his own family. Like I'm thinking of that scene where he's like translating he says, "Oh yeah, I know German," and then he translates, and it's like totally not what he's saying.
I ate the lollipops yesterday. Yeah.
Yeah. But you see, it's not even just for Joshua. Like the adults in the camp are like, "This is funny. This is fun. Like this, you have brought life. You have brought light into the darkness for all of us."
Yeah. Without denying, right? I like that example of him getting up there and pretending to speak German, right? Because what he does afterwards when the officers leave is he goes to Bartolomeo and he's like, make sure everybody knows, like, here's what the officer said. Because like that's the thing. It's not like avoidant, right? Even to that little bit about frivolity earlier. It's not like he's refusing to come to grips with the horror of what's actually happening. Like he fully realizes it, and yet he's sort of shielding his son and also just lifting everybody else. And like, because we're transformation is this word that we've kind of revisited a couple of times, reframing, like it's a work, right? Like it's Paul in Ephesians talks about like we were made for good works. And like part of this like good work is this transformation, like the perception, right? The ability to see the light in the midst of the darkness, and the ability to aid in that sort of transformation, to reframe these things, to offer encouragement to people who are sort of, beaten down, whatever it is. Like it's a thing he does, right? Like it's a reality that Guido helps co-create in a sense, right? Like his will, his effort goes into this and actually like changes the reality that all of these men and his son have like in the midst of this tragedy.
You said something there, Steve, that I think is so again, I'm probably going to struggle to put my thoughts together right now in this way, but
I'll translate, don't worry.
Yeah, exactly. You speak Christian pretty fluently. It's fine. Does it help if I do it in an accent like this? No? Oh, mamma mia. Okay, so when he goes and he does like the German translation, which obviously is just hilarious. And don't even think about asking for lollipops, right? Like, he himself becomes this kind of barrier, right? Who takes the risk and like bears all of really the wrath of the Nazis kind of in himself right then, right? Like he's standing between them and all of these people. I mean, Bartolomeo, like he knows what's going on, but it's such an act of mercy to do that, because like it's so much easier, right, to like hear really difficult things from people that love you than it is from people that are out to get you, right? So like Bartolomeo gets to be, and it's interesting that he has the name of like one of the apostles, right? Like Bartholomew, like he gets to be the one who translates to his friends, like this is what's going on, and there's kind of like an ability to even shield them and incorporate them into love, right? Like I'm thinking about I sort of think that in the church, like we probably could stand to hear from people who love us, like, you're really not that special. Like, and yet your name is written in the book of life, and you've been chosen by God and you're God's beloved, and like you're gonna die one day. But like if that was coming from somebody who I didn't trust and love to tell me that I'm not that special, then I would be like, you're really mean. That's not like, that's a really not nice thing to say. And I don't think that I can hear that from you. You have neither, the privilege nor the position in my life to tell me that I'm not special. But from the right person, it actually can be this kind of like, okay, Okay, now what? Like, I'm okay, I get that. Like, I'm not that special. I don't know if that made any sense.
That's St. Augustine's, if you love me, you can tell me anything. I quote that all the time. I love that. I find that to be very true in my life. Like the people who I know care about me, tell me whatever. But it's harder for me to hear it from the people that I don't really trust, that they're, that they do care about me, that they.
What's the motivation behind it, right? Is it actually meant to bring you up, or is it meant to tear you down? Because
right.
Even to think about that in this context, right? If you want to think about what happens in the movie on like a very strictly, it's like superficial is maybe an uncharitable word, right? Guido is lying the entire time, right? He's taking this like falsehood and he's putting it over everybody's lives because there are no points, right? There is no prize. Like that was actually a heavy anvil that he was carrying around in this smelting factory, and Bartolomeo got his arm ripped open at some point. Nothing about this was good. And yet this wasn't a lie based upon deception, right? This wasn't a lie that was meant to like hinder the truth. It was actually a lie that was meant to reveal the truth and to try to actually like break through and, show them something rather than conceal something to them.
Right.
And his motivations matter in that context. So as we think about these big pictures of like beauty, right? The other thing in the outline here is the ethics of beauty, right? Which I imagine like that's Christina point in the outline. I
actually think Christian put it in, but I got excited because once he starts telling me what he was thinking, I'm gonna run with it.
Well, let's talk. There it is.
Yes, okay. Someone who's joining the other side.
I read books.
You do read books. I don't have to worry about that.
I like the books.
I know.
That's true. That's true.
Usually you're the one who suggests the books. Let's hear it, Christian.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be fair, I've only read a little bit of this book because it is a very big book.
It is a big one.
Show you again. Here's my hand for comparison. That's a
a lot of pages.
It's big.
Mm-hmm.
Books in Zoom window might be bigger than they appear. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
But not that one. It's really that big.
No, it really. Yeah, this one actually is 700 something pages. It's a tome. But yeah. So in the Ethics of Beauty, Dr. Tim Pcsolyar, he kind of talks about this idea of like war and war trauma in particular, and he suggests, right, that like not war is not the opposite of war. Right? Like the opposite of war is not peace. But rather he actually says the opposite of war is liturgy, which to me, I kind of take to be this kind of like beautiful work, right? Like there's this beautiful work of restoration and communion and connection with like the divine and connection with others and all of that kind of stuff. And even, like what we're talking about here with the anvils, and there's it's not good and all of this kind of stuff. The opposite, or the more powerful thing to overcome the carrying of anvils in the smelting factory is not carrying them, but rather the ability to transcend carrying them, right? To go above it, to rise above it, and to have a spirit that is not diminished by the carrying. That is actually the thing that's more powerful. Right, is to be able to go above the circumstances and to become a person who is able to give thanks in all circumstances, even when carrying an anvil and smelting. So he kind of brings out this idea, which again I know very limitedly, but I have been thinking about a lot. What he calls the beauty first way, as this way of like encountering the divine, and that is a very fascinating idea to me, because like, I mean, imagine if this movie were called Life is Good or Life is True or like there's something to that rings a little hollow kind of like in the watching of this film, right? But like what breaks through and transcends this darkness and this death is not the true and the good, but the beautiful, right? Like that's the thing that wins the day. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I'm starting with some of those thoughts. Is that an okay jumping off place?
I mean, I think that relates directly to what Steve said about the lie. If you start with the good or the true, you couldn't have done this. You couldn't have told this story. Guido couldn't have protected his son if he had started in the wrong place. It doesn't denigrate the good and the true. And as you go through Dr. Tim's work, you see that that beauty first doesn't mean beauty only, but it's the proper ordering of goodness, truth, and beauty, that it should be beauty first, then goodness, so that beauty, an encounter with beauty prompts you to virtue, and working towards virtue helps you encounter the truth, who is Jesus Christ himself. And so they're not unrelated to each other, but it's the proper ordering. And that he makes an argument, I think it's a good one, that, even our best sides of our culture don't typically go in that order. We typically come at things from either goodness, so moralistic, moralisms, or truth, like this is the right thing, this is the right way, facts. Whatever, the facts. Yeah. And that both of those in their own way dissect reality rather than liturgize reality.
Yeah. Because both of those words, right, like truth and goodness, like the way that we tend to think about them is very binary. Like it's true or it's false, it's good or it's bad. There's very kind of sharp lines that actually don't necessarily facilitate something richer and nuanced. Emma, you were going to jump in.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, because kind of to build off what you said, like a lot of times if you are talking to someone or whatever, and they're like, how's it going? Or how's life? You're like, oh, life's good. Like rarely do we ever say like life is beautiful, but in actuality, like what this movie draws out and what Dr. Tim is saying is that beauty is probably the only thing that is truly all around us at all times. Like life sometimes is not good. Like that's how it goes. But life most likely is continually beautiful. It's kind of like you have to have the framework, like the eyes to see, kind of like Guido, of like, where is the beauty that I can find that is all around me at all times.
Right.
Yeah. And for him, right, like Guido's approach to beauty, and because I'm even now thinking through this, like in terms of kind of like that, like the beauty first and then truth and goodness, because he starts with like this really beautiful like narrative, right, about what's happening in these concentration camps with his sons and with his son, in like terms of making it like about points and the tank and etc. Right. And then he does go to Bartolomeo and says, like, make sure everybody knows the truth, right? Yeah. Like we're starting with this place of beauty and communion. Like, hey, we're all in this game, right? Look at us all in this together. And the winner gets a tank. And everyone's like, what is going on? But once they actually know the truth, they are kind of able to do the same kind of work as Guido, right? And to like shield Joshua too, which is really good and beautiful, right? Like, they're able also to participate in that goodness and beauty, because doesn't Guido at one point ask Bartolomeo, like, hey, how many points did you get today? And he's like, 40 or whatever. And he's like, yeah, see, we're way ahead of him, like don't tell him that, but we're way ahead.
I think he tells him how many stitches he got.
Oh, got stitches. That's what it is. Yeah. I was like, why?
Points.
Yeah.
But you can see how an overcommitment to truth first could have been very, very problematic here, because
Joshua, here's what's happening.
Right. If we were, or maybe even goodness first, if you want to put it in the moralistic, like, is he lying? Is he telling the truth kind of terms? If we started with goodness and it's bad to lie, he couldn't have transformed this world for Joshua or for the people around him. If you start with truth, like the facts of what is that, Dad? What is that, Dad? And he just tells him, he also couldn't have saved Joshua. It's only when he starts with, we're going to find beauty, and in beauty in this way for him is, this whimsy, this joy, this everything is going to be a good laugh, right? Like that's the thing that keeps them going. And like even Joshua says at the end to his mom is like, we got so many points. It was such a laugh, like this joyfulness that he brings to it. That's the only way that any of it can be stomached. And it actually transforms what we even mean by goodness and truth, because it's not just the facts of the prison camp life that are truth. It's the encounter of love. Like love is what is true. Yeah. And I think that's what you get, like what Emma said at the end with, realizing that this is like Joshua telling the story of his dad, is you get this more of this encounter with goodness and truth rather than, I don't know, this sort of dissected version.
Yeah. Because
This is helping somehow, by the way, in case anyone was wondering.
hands.
Usually
I don't know.
Get the visual. I just get it.
You don't usually get the visual. Usually just Emma gets the visual of me doing this while I talk. And anyway, everyone else is subjected to it today.
Everybody do the pop culture. Yeah, it's just one of these. So I think maybe a way to lean into this a little bit more, right, is that like something that seems not unique, right? Because again, I don't want to create false distinctions between the good, the true, and the beautiful, and all that sort of stuff. But there's something perhaps more inherently relational in beauty as kind of a concept or a category or whatever it is than truth and goodness. Because again, truth, when you sort of divorce it, right, it's like it's true or it's not, right? And truth can sometimes be too difficult for us to bear. Right. I mean, like Paul will talk about, like, when when you needed milk, I gave you milk. Like sometimes you're not ready for steak. Right. Like something can be true. And yet also we might not just be in a position to receive it. Like little Joshua, like, hey, little guy, we're in an extermination camp and you probably don't have very many weeks to live. Like, no, like, right. But beauty is this thing which kind of touches the soul, and beauty is this thing like that inherently, like there's the effect, right? There's some sort of relational thing to it, that these things are now mediated through a relationship rather than just kind of these dichotomous kind of abstract sort of things, right? There's more than just binary sort of yes, no. And this relational
Christian has
thing.
something going on in his head that we have to hear, whatever it is.
I'm sorry. No, it's not. It's like, it's just like, hey, little guy, we only have a little time to live. But hey, go make some friends. Go play tag.
Sorry.
Yeah, that was very macabre.
Just, yeah. It was like it went through all of it, and just like seeing Joshua like, Papa, I've got to get my house in order, I can't just go play tag. What do you think? I'm gonna die very soon. Where's the priest?
You're Jewish.
Yeah, where's the rabbi? I think this is kind of to go with what both
Jewish
Christina
priest.
and Steve are saying. Is
watch it in Italian with no dubs. Yes. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. if they were to approach this with goodness first, I don't think it would have happened. I think it would have been like, life is crappy. Like, suck it up, buddy. Like, kind of like we got a couple weeks to live, and like everything sucks. So go find your Jewish priest. But I think that by starting with beauty, I just read a book. It was a young adult realistic fiction book about a girl who struggles with mental illness, and one of the things her psychologist told her a lot in the book was like, think about 3 things you can see or 3 things you can hear, and I'm sure that's like a common psychological coping strategy. But I think that with beauty, like,
it's like for panic attacks, I think sometimes.
Yeah, for panic attacks, yeah.
To get grounded,
yeah. So I think like with beauty, like you can always find like 3 things that are beautiful, right? You might not be able to find 3 things that are good or 3 things that are true in a situation, but you could always find something that is beautiful.
Yeah. And you can, and again, like to the point about transformation, right? Because, like liturgy is kind of the thing that has framed this kind of part of our conversation, right? And that's a part of liturgy, right? Like there is a transformation that happens, right? There's like something that happens. And like when you're spotting beauty, right? Like maybe that's the other side of this sort of relationality. Like something is true or not, just kind of outside of you, right? But like, you can change the way that you see things and actually like spot beauty whereas you otherwise can. Like, not to say that you can totally just sort of will it out of nowhere, right? But you are less bound by the brute facticity of things, right? You're not sort of observing like, oh, this is the dimensions of a thing. It's just kind of like an abstract sort of whatever. Like, if I look at it from this angle rather than this angle, like I could see a beauty that I otherwise couldn't see. My posture actually changes the way that that I interact with the world.
And
which again is
this might actually
thing.
this also actually might seem like a really crass way to kind of even put it too. Like, when you think about like meeting somebody, like, or like falling in love, right? Like, generally speaking, the first thing we notice is kind of like what they look like, right? We're like, oh, like she's pretty good looking, or he's pretty good looking. We don't look at them and go like, well, he seems like a really nice and moral, upright person. I should go talk to him. And he just so happens to be very good looking. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
There's a person who looks like they would never lie to me. I am meeting them in a bar. They probably wouldn't tell me the truth all of the time. Like,
I mean, that's why Guido is drawn to Dora, right? He's physically attracted to her at the very beginning. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, and well, a little too attracted to her right out of the gate, that's for sure.
It's very Italian. That's what I tried to tell
Boundaries.
myself.
Yeah. It's fine. He's Italian. It's fine.
Parts were weird.
Guido gets me too'd on the next episode of Pop Culture Coffee Hour.
Oh, he's dead.
Roberto Benigni?
No,
Nope.
Guido.
Oh. Yeah, no, yeah, sorry.
Guido gets me too'd posthumously.
They put him on the throne and they anathematized him posthumously. It's all crazy.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a lot going on. But I mean, it really does. It has to start there, right? Like, I mean, and even just if we follow like our experience, we know that like beauty really is the thing that kind of like perks our interests immediately, right? It almost is like the thing that is most viscerally engaging, because it gets us at the level of the body, you know, like which when you really go to like, I don't always know what I'm thinking, I don't always know what I'm feeling, but my body is kind of always with me and always feeling and always doing things, right? So when we can engage things at the level of the body, there isn't like an immediacy of response and an immediacy of action that kind of is demanded, right? Like when she's beautiful and falling out of the barn, like he just acts. There's no thinking or feeling in that moment. There's just like the acting in response into beauty. And conversely, right, like this is what where I think things started to get really kind of interesting, is like as the darkness kind of begins to settle in, right? Like you get this kind of weird hint of it when there's this riddle with the doctor kind of like earlier on in the movie, right? When he's working as a waiter and he goes up to the doctor and he says, I have the answer. The answer is darkness. And the riddle is the more you have of it, the less you see it, which is incredible, right? To have that kind of way of saying like the darker your vision becomes, the more you kind of get accustomed to the dark and not seeing beauty, like the less you begin to really realize you're in the dark.
Right. That's like Cain. I always feel like that's Cain's response when he kills his brother, right? Like he doesn't know what he's done. It's like he's been blinded to his own. It's not just a sense of like, I'm trying to get out of this. It's like, what do you mean? I'm not in charge of him. There's a real sense that he's like very quickly blinded to his ability to see, what wrong he's done. And I don't know.
Yeah. He just can't fathom it. Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting. We were doing our 3 Men in a Bible podcast earlier today, and we were talking about this Sunday is the Sunday of the paralytic, and in Acts we read about like Dorcas, right, and the raising of Dorcas, and Father Boniotti was talking about like how that name comes from the word for a gazelle, classically, or like a deer, right, and like these animals are sort of known for their eyes and their ability to see, and this is kind of like a characteristic that is kind of associated with saintliness, this sort of like up on the mountaintop, sort of above some of the more kind of mundane like cares, but with this ability to see clearly. Like the closer you are to the light, like the more your eyes open and the more you're able to see. Whereas the more you sort of sink into the darkness, the less you're able to even sort of perceive the darkness, right? Like these fundamental postures of life, like we always talk about theosis in the church, like becoming more and more like God, right? Drawing closer to the light, having those eyes open. We don't necessarily talk as much or have the same kind of language to talk about what the reverse looks like, anti-theosis, or sort of becoming more like the demons, and to the point, right, where we lack awareness of ourselves, like Cain's inability to perceive the gravity of what he did is almost like the prodigal son losing himself at the trough of the pigs, right? It's just like I don't know how to perceive the world anymore because like I don't know who I am anymore. Right. And like that's such a poignant thing, right? Like, I mean, the doctor is actually like a really interesting example of this, because the doctor is such like this really kind of like warm, funny guy at the very beginning of the movie, right? And yet, when you see him again later in the movie, you get to know him in this like deeper and more sort of disturbing way. Like he actually is like this riddle that he spoke is actually sort of prophetic of who he is and who he's become, which is kind of this terrifying moment, right?
Yeah.
Makes
Right.
me think too about like how this might fall, like manifest itself in our own life, right? Like how we might fall into the cycle of sin, and then like you get so deep into that like it just becomes like part of you, and you don't really notice that, like you don't have that same like pit in your stomach afterwards. Just kind of like, oh, I guess it's just like what I do now. And why something like confession is so important, because even if you like go back every time and like you say the exact same thing, it's just something about naming it and have someone else name it for you that helps pull you out a little bit of that darkness, I think, and not being in that cycle where things become unrecognizable and dark.
Yeah. Because even if you're drowning, right, and on some level we're all kind of drowning in sin, like there's a difference between kicking towards the surface, right, like realizing that your lungs are filling with water as opposed to just sort of succumbing to it.
Which I think brings us kind of full circle back to this idea of like liturgy kind of as being the thing that breaks the darkness, right? Like because it's just so beautiful. Like if nothing else, right? When I was doing the We Are Orthodoxy, the thing that people had the most respect for and regard for was the liturgy itself. Like no one, not a single person that I interviewed had anything bad to say about the liturgy or how archaic it is or how whatever. Even the people who struggled with it, like their struggles were like, from the perspective of female ordination and like, why can't I get closer to the mystery? Right. Like that was the struggle of like wanting to be so close, wanting to be close to the beauty. Right. Mm-hmm. And like that, the beauty of liturgy is kind of always reestablishing us as participants in that beauty. Right. Like it's this life-giving thing for us. And I think about like Guido, and every time he sees Dora, he's like, Buongiorno, principessa, right? Like there's this like giving of an accolade to her and like adorning her in beauty right from the get-go, right? Like he beatifies her immediately. And there's this, when we commune, it's like not accidental, I think, that we receive the Eucharist and hear the words, right? The servant of God like receives, the body and blood of Christ for the forgiveness of sins and life everlasting, right? Like that, there can't be an accident to that. Yeah. It's this re-identifying correctly in this in relation to the beautiful one, right? Like him who is beauty itself. Like there has to be something that pierces the darkness in our own souls. Yeah. In that way.
Yeah. I think we'd be wise to remember this. Like, I didn't want to move on from talking about beauty without touching on this point in terms of how we think about drawing people into the church too, because I think we really do often take a goodness or truth first take. And I think, Christian, from your experience doing We Are Orthodoxy and from like what Dr. Tim says about liturgy and beauty, I think we would be wise to try to evangelize from beauty, to take a more, conversion of the Slavs way of bringing people into the church. Like, we didn't know if we were in heaven or on earth. Like, can we be a people of beauty, not just within the walls of the liturgy, but are we a people of beauty that radiate this light in the darkness in a way that people are attracted to and drawn to it? And then from that unfolds virtue and an encounter with truth and the correction of sin and, the darkness that's working within us. I think I wonder if sometimes some of the ways in which people struggle after their conversion with sort of the lack of goodness or the lack of black and whiteness in terms of truth, is because that's what we're doing it kind of wrong. We're catechizing them in the wrong way. We're catechizing them with goodness and truth first, so that when those things break up a little bit, they haven't been trained, I guess, or they haven't been first given the eyes to be so in love with the beautiful one that, okay, I can make sense of the rest of that. The rest of that isn't going to shake my faith and my love my desire to be near beauty, to be in liturgy, because the rest of it doesn't seem so black and white. It doesn't seem so sorted out.
Yeah. That's really important. I think even the order, right? Like the first thing that comes to mind here is like today, right? How do we tend to think about like bringing people into the church? Like, here's a bunch of books to read, right? We do kind of our period of catechism, then they're sort of sacramentally received. Whereas like classically, right? I mean, there was a little bit of instruction that happened earlier on, but like, and you think about this, we just experienced this on Pascha. The readings change, Pascha, we get into the gospel according to John, which is the more theological gospel. We get into the book of Acts. And that's where this, like, I mean, St. Cyril, like there's all these like catechetical programs. I don't want to use the word programs, but you know what I mean? That happen after somebody is brought into the church. Like, it's encountering Christ. It's getting used to the sort of the rhythms of Christian life. And then we're going to feel like, because truth is going to be understood, not in this philosophical sort of sense, not in this sort of polemical sense, but it's grounded in the, like that lodestone, right? That North Star of beauty. And then truth and goodness are going to fill in around it, which is important.
The good news of great joy is not that we have a nice rule book that you can follow and that will like somehow correct you. And it's not that we have like more correct facts. Those things might also be true, but like they only make any sense. Like just the way that the camp, it might be a horrible place where you might die tomorrow. Those things might be true, but they can only make sense and actually be transformative in the context of the story that Guido tells his son. And that the good news of great joy, the thing that we're going to get a great laugh out of, that's the only place that those other things can be contextualized in a way that they're even useful.
Yeah. So I want to try to connect this with what Christian was brought up before, because you brought up the repetition of the Buongiorno, principessa. I tried studying for Italian for a while, but I just totally butchered it, whatever it is. I'm the anti thing. I'm speaking Italian with a very heavy American accent.
You're ESL. We don't want you to do like ITL, like you're already like GFL. You got the ESL thing. You don't need to be ITL. It's fine.
Yes, I appreciate you. I was trying to do a Greek accent, but
it's really hard not to do it, And it's like, am I speaking Italian now? Yeah, like this is what I understand Italian is like. Yeah,
I was trying to do Greek too, it just didn't come out.
Do you think we've lost just like a ton of Italian listeners at this point? Like we've lost our entire Italian demographic is just
unsubscribe,
like,
but yeah.
Hey, it's me. I don't follow you no more. I don't. I don't appreciate your anti-Italian sentiments.
All on your shoulders, Christian, if that's the case.
I'll bear that burden.
All right.
Oh, I teared up a little bit. What was I saying?
Sorry.
No. Oh, so Buongiorno, principessa, and this bit about like liturgy, right? Like, I think the thing that maybe a way to kind of like connect these 2 points, right? The fact that it became a ritual for him, right? It was more than just a custom. It was kind of this like liturgy that his family, to the point that, and it's very adorable, right? When he does the little magic trick when Joshua is in the end table and he sort of moves the flower and he jumps out of the end table and he says it to his mom as well. It's just this kind of like this greeting that he has learned to adopt. It's in like the DNA of this family, because they just like, it's what they do, right? It's how they honor their wife and mother. Like beauty is a thing that we're constantly sort of participating in. And, the contra, the sort of philosophical sort of abstract things, like these rituals, these participations, these things that engage us on all these levels are a way of like enchanting life or re-enchanting life, I guess, from our posture. Right. Because to say that sort of transforms the encounter that Guido has with his wife and Joshua has with his mother, right? Like these words and these things and these rituals that we do, which are the same and yet sort of different every time because we're sort of sinking deeper and deeper into it. Like the liturgy, unique amongst all the services, right? The liturgy is like 99.9% the same every time we do it, except for the hymn of the day, which is like on purpose. Everything else changes, like Matins changes, Vespers changes, whatever it is. But it's this sameness that is sort of like sinking us into this thing, like re-enchanting our imaginations and opening us up to something. And that's the part that we're missing, right? This rituality, this participation, this sinking deeper into something, like leaving just the sort of abstract sort of truthness goodness, the stuff that I read, right, when I decide to become an Orthodox Christian or, become re-engaged as an Orthodox Christian, as opposed to like something or someone is here, right? There's an experience that is here. It's like
it's the phonograph that breaks through the concentration camp, right? Like it's the familiar song that we go like, oh, I know who's calling me. I know who's playing that song for me. I know who's summoning me to himself, right? Like, I asked someone the other day, I was like, has Jesus ever made you do anything? And they were like, they hesitated and they were like, no, but he sure doesn't give up on me. And I was like, exactly. Like that's exactly correct, right? Like he never makes you do anything, but he's willing to continue to pursue and come after you and like break through the darkness. And for those of us who have the liturgy, like if we can see that as like the phonograph in the darkness, right? Then like we understand he's continually pursuing us, playing our song, calling us by name, saying Buongiorno, right? Like popping out of everywhere. And if we had the eyes to see him everywhere, right? Like I love when she says like the best thing about you is that like I kind of never really know where you're gonna show up. Like, I mean, that I'm paraphrasing her, right?
Yeah.
But like imagine if we felt that way about Christ, right? Like the best thing about you, Jesus, is like we never know when we're gonna find you. We just never know. Like,
but we're anticipating and waiting for it everywhere we go.
Eagerly and ready to respond, right? And even looking for you.
And that we know that it's going to be a joyful encounter, right? It's not going to be a like, oh, shoot, there he is. Like, oh, like we know it's going to be something that is good and positive and joyful. And
that is transformative. Both the liturgy, like that, like you said, that he passes on to his son, and sort of this like in this surprise and joyful encounter, she's changed by it. You can see like she's fussing about the bath. He needs to take the bath. Why isn't he taking the bath? And like him popping out of the table and saying Buongiorno to her, which I'm even worse at the Italian than all of you combined. So
can you just do like your best Mario accent for us?
I absolutely will not do that.
Can you just say it's a me, a Mario?
No.
But I tried, Steve. I tried. Can you please stop paying Christina to do this?
Oh yeah. Wait, you've been paying me for this? I think you're behind then.
Something
Christina's gonna need a raise.
And
that's 2 consecutive episodes where Christian has brought up the pay scale on this podcast.
I'm gonna submit some back end pay for all the time I spent sitting on Zoom waiting for Christina to figure out how to work technology.
Yes. It's definitely an hourly rate, Emma. It's good.
Listen,
it's good.
You definitely got actual like points in heaven for waiting on me. Let me just tell you that. There was a development of virtue. And now I've completely forgot to say, that she's transformed, right? She's transformed by the creative liturgy that he provides for them, and the encounter, the joyful encounter, because, in the small ways, like I said, like you can tell she's like irritated and annoyed, and she loosens up because of the Buongiorno, or even just her falling in love with him and leaving the egg guy who's a mess. But I mean,
literally,
ultimately, like, ultimately she in this story is like the Gentile who is drawn to the Christ figure in this story, and who follows him. She's like she follows him into death or into the possibility of death completely willingly. Yeah. And without any hesitation, without any complaint, because of his overwhelming great, we kind of called it creepy, but I think like in some ways it's like it is a Christ-like relentless pursuit of her. And ultimately, because she's fallen in love with him, she's able to even to consider following him.
Yeah. Well, there's no hesitation. Like she doesn't even hesitate. There's no consideration. It's like, well, obviously I want to go with him that I may die with him.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
like, and you think
they're not on the same train car. They're not on the same, they're actually never together. There's this like I believing without seeing kind of thing that goes on, and there's just the phonograph from across the camp, or the one time he gets on the loudspeaker. There's these little bits that
calls
ensure
her name
her
from the like in between the trains or whatever.
Right, ensure her of his love. But there's never another encounter in this life for her. with him.
Yeah.
And yet she still follows, and yet she still is willing to go into whatever darkness he might have gone into.
That's so good.
And I think like, and I think you can't even understand that moment, like her decision to get on the train, or at least this is kind of helpful in my head, when they're at that dinner, right? The last time you see Egg Guy getting the sort of ostrich egg, where, you know, she crawls under the table in her kind of like fancy gown dress, which seems very out of character, right? Because she seems sort of very sort of like, you know, prim and proper. She comes from this very wealthy family. Here she is like on her hands and knees, scrabbling under this table. And then she climbs up onto the table and gets onto this horse that is spray painted green and has, you know, warning, you know, Jewish bookseller or whatever it says on it, right? And rides away in this like ignoble, sort of ridiculous sort of thing, right? I mean, she takes this leap into the absurd, and then she's willing to take this leap into the darkness later, both out of the sense of like love and maybe that begins to get us to the next big point in the outline anyway, to think about like sacrifice, right? Because we've been talking a lot about her desire, because she didn't have to. Right, like the male guys get taken by the Nazi SS officers, and yet as she sees them being put onto the train, right, she kind of insists and says like, "I need to get on that train," and she doesn't raise her voice or whatever it is. She just kind of states it as like a matter of fact, like, "I'm going to get on that train," and yet, you know, it's because she knows who she is and she loves him and she's willing. Like, she can't imagine herself without him at that point.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like, everyone was kind of saying like her decision to get on the train, but it almost doesn't even look like a decision, right? Like, she doesn't really like go back to her house and she's like, oh, like, should I go with them? Should I like it's she's so deep in her love for Guido, in her loyalty to Guido, that she's just like, this is what I am to do. And I think that if we kind of continue this comparison of Guido with the Christ figure, like, that's what we hope to reach, right? It's never really a decision we have to make. It's just something that we know we are called to do, or something that we know in our bones is right and true and good. To kind of go back to the beginning, like, when the beauty transcends, I think that the truth and goodness becomes not even like a, let me look at the other thing, let me look at the falsehood, or let me look at the bad. It just is something that you feel so deep in your bones that there is no opposite to it.
Right.
Yeah, this is what I will do because this is who I am.
Mm-hmm.
His, you know, like, because it's this responsive love, right? Like, you know, it really is like she has no choice. There is no choice, like you were saying, Emma. I love that, right? Like, there's no real option besides being with the one who loves her, right? And who his one of my favorite lines in the liturgy, right, is that it's not ceased to do all things until thou it's raised us up, right? Like that line, I hear it every single time. You did not cease to do all things until you would raise this up. And that to me is the story of Guido, right? He did not, there was nothing that he didn't do like to get to Dora, right? Like, he poses as this inspector from Rome. He like goes to the opera, he kidnaps her essentially. But like, he's willing to do all kinds of things to win her over, to empty himself fully, making a fool of himself, stripping himself down to his underwear, and to using the Italian flag as a diaper. And like, there's all kinds of things that he does in this way, right? And it only makes sense that someone who loves her that much, she would have to want to go with him. Like, she would have to, like, where else is there to be? And, you know, and I mentioned this earlier, but I do feel like, you know, we focus so much, like, especially with like doubting Thomas's, like, you know, unless I see his hands and I see his, you know, put my finger in his side, like, I'm not going to believe. But he also is the one who, just like a few chapters prior, was like, let us go with him that we may die with him. Mm-hmm. You know, he's the one who understands like the love of the Savior, right? Who understands the love of Christ and knows there's nowhere else to be than with him. So like, if he's going to go die, then, well, like, I kind of want to go be there too, right? Like, this is the way of the Christian, the way of the cross is to follow Jesus into the dark. Like, that's really the only way, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. Which is faithfulness.
Yeah.
Ultimately, right? Because like, that is such a risk, because you're kind of like, you're stepping out of yourself. I mean, Dora steps out of the safety and security of her family as she was growing up, right? I mean, clearly, like she is much more hoity-toity than Guido is, right? And she steps out of this and she steps into like unknowing, right? I mean, she doesn't know what her life is going to look like with Guido. She doesn't, I mean, when she gets up onto that green horse, for crying out loud, like she doesn't know where they're going. And yet she knows him enough and trusts him enough to be faithful to him and follow him, which is kind of, again, like part of the Christian story. Like, you know, it's not so much about like having faith in this intellectual sort of sense, like being faithful and just being willing to, when Christ sticks out his hand, right? And he's like, well, there's a little bit of a dark tunnel ahead and we're going to walk through it together. You know, you follow him through.
And she actually asks him to do that, right? And she's like, take me away from here. Like,
yeah.
He doesn't, like, who knows? Like he's already kidnapped you once and taken you out into the pouring rain. So I guess I can't get too much worse.
Right.
I don't know.
It's like Lord, I feel like that's more of like her Peter moment on the waves, you know. She's just like, Lord, save me. Like I trust, like I doubted, I wasn't sure, and now I see, like I'm gonna drown if I stay here. Like take me out of this, like save me. And in some ways I actually appreciate, and I think the story is more effective in that it doesn't really dwell on like all the questions she could have had about like, should I, as an Italian Catholic girl, marry this Jewish guy? What will that mean? It's the 1930s, and clearly like this racist regime is rising. Like it doesn't dwell on any of that because of this sort of the compelling nature of his pursuit and the compelling nature of his love for her. I don't know. I think that makes the story work better. And like Emma was saying, it makes it to where it's just not a choice. There's no wondering and debating and pros and cons lists about any of these choices, because they come from this response to an encounter, not from an intellectual decision about what's going to work, what's going to make sense.
As a viewer, it's very believable, right? I mean, like, I don't think there's any point in the movie where you doubt her motivations or doubt his motivations, or because again, like this goes from the absurd, getting in that green horse, to the tragic, you know, getting in this cattle car full of Jewish people who are going to what they think is going to be their deaths. And there's never this moment where you kind of like, that doesn't make sense. I mean, it's even just like artistically, it's presented in this very thoroughly believable way.
Right. Yeah. And I think if we want to like keep moving through some of the relationships and also tie it back to sort of our like beauty first versus truth or goodness first, you know, we kind of touched on talking about the doctor, but I feel like the doctor is really the truth first approach here, you know, like what the thing that makes him is the solving of riddles, right? Wanting to have the answer to the tough question. Like what's the Orthodox perspective on? No, that's not what he does. But it's kind of he could have filled that gap in this sorry. I might have shown some true colors there. But you know, like he wants the answer to his riddles, and for him, Guido, like the Christ figure, it just serves that purpose. And when the question gets too tough, you know, or when the question's completely absurd, actually, like if you try to like, if you go research, like what does the last riddle mean? Like what's the answer to the last riddle? The maker of the film said, like, there's not an answer. The point is that the war was so absurd, like that there is no answer to the last riddle. Guido serves no purpose anymore now for him. He can discard of Christ if the answer isn't clear, if there's any absurdity in life that just can't be explained away. What need do we have for a Christ who doesn't give us a solid perspective, an answer to every question? You know, there's more to that. I think you guys have some good stuff to say also about the doctor, but that's kind of like one of my takes on his character and his personality.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that is, it's a really, I mean, that final scene with him is pretty haunting, you know. The line that got me was when he turns to Guido and he's like, I can't sleep, help me. you know,
Right.
as if like just give me this relief, like while you're in here suffering, your friends are dying, people are being executed, and I'm worried about my comfort, you know, like, I mean, and for me, I'm thinking like, how often, man, like, do I treat my Lord as this, like, please just like, let me have a really good night of sleep tonight. And like, please just like help me with my whatever. But there's like not anything kind of that moves me beyond to this like love of a person, right? Like there's this kind of utilitarian aspect to Christ, kind of, I think that we tend to use, like, you know, Jesus is like a genie in the sky,
Yeah.
someone who's there, like you were saying, to like answer our riddles and give us like the Orthodox perspective on things. But when it's that, right, there's no real relationship. It's like he's just like a magic 8-ball, and like the relationship is broken, and so sacrifice on either side actually becomes unthinkable and impossible, right? Like there's nothing to give, right? Because there's no real personhood. The personhood has already been taken away. Like it's already been lost. So I can't possibly give it up, right?
Yeah.
There's just pain and frustration and a breakdown in relationship that is just heartbreaking, you know, because especially for like when you're watching the movie anyway, you see it, because like for Guido, you think that it's this relationship that's going to be this path out, but it's just not. It's just not. It's just more, and really in some ways even a worse exploitation of his personhood, because the Doctor knew him. You know,
it's that much more callous and banal.
Horrifying moment in the movie. Yeah, for sure. You know, and then when this, because it's right after that he sees the pile of the bodies, right? When you kind of realize like, yep, that's all that they are, right? That's all they are here. You know, like the veil's lifted completely finally, and it takes that moment of the encounter with the Doctor to lift the veil. But it's
this
horrifying.
charnel house. And it's really sad too, because that last interaction really reframes the previous interactions, because like even watching it again this second time, although admittedly like my remembrance of the plot wasn't like super whatever, like you do think there's a friendly rapport that's there. Like you do think they genuinely like each other. And there's that moment where he kind of sees him and the Doctor's face sort of lights up, like, oh, there's this, you know, Guido calls him a friend, right? He has this belief that, okay, this is a potential way out, because it's not just a former customer or whatever it is, it's a friend of mine. And yet, you know, in retrospect, it reframes it, right? The last thing that Dr. Lessing says before he leaves for Berlin, he's like, oh, you're the most ingenious waiter that I've ever known. And that's all it was ever really about, right? Like, you're ingenious and you have a clever little mind that's helped me with my puzzles. And all I ever really want out of you are my are puzzles, and this hope for friendship, this hope for whatever. Like, it was all a lie. There was never any warmth there. I agree. It's the most horrifying. I mean, in a movie full of horrifying moments, right? The wall of bodies is horrifying. The gunshots in the alley at the very end, right? When Guido turns the corner with the, but there's something like,
but it's like, it's horrifying. And those are horrifying in a way that like is congruent, right? Like you go like, oh, there's like a stack of bodies. That makes sense. There's, you know, an execution that's happening. That's horrifying. But that's like this face-to-face interaction where like someone could so like overtly overlook the humanity of another person, you know, and then like that's horrifying on another level. That is like, you know, it's the unseen horror that's there. That's terrifying, right?
And I think we stand in the position of the Doctor, both with our fellow humans and with Christ, you know, in that sense of like, it's horrifying because he knew him, right? You said, so like in some ways, like we think we know Christ, but if we're using him, if we kind of created a version that's useful to us of who he is, when we actually encounter him and he's actually calling for us, and it doesn't like work the way we wanted it to, you know, I don't know why we're totally shocked that we receive silence. I mean, Guido's completely silent. There's nothing he can say to the Doctor. There's no answer he can give, even if there was an answer to the dumb riddle, because of the way the relationship is broken. So I think we could read it that way, and then we can also read it the other way of you know, us being the Doctor, and who are we blind to seeing their humanity? Like, who are the people for us the people that we've seen as either useful, or we've cast into a particular role, and when they're not in that role, we don't know what to do with them anymore, and we might mistreat them or overlook them, or be a further cause of their pain or their suffering because of how we've cast them in our own minds.
Yeah, totally.
I think Guido being able to solve the riddles too is an example of how like even like truly we should have this beauty first way of life, but that doesn't mean we're going to then neglect truth and goodness, right? Like that still can be part of who you are or who you can be, because he still has that intellect in him, even though he seems kind of like frivolous or silly, or is looking at like the like unimportant parts of life, you know what I mean, like riding around on his little bike or whatever. He still has the kind of like the wit that a doctor can admire, and that he can solve riddles that a doctor can give him. So I think it shows also like the levels that Guido has as a character.
Yeah, he definitely is complex and surprising, right? And resilient. I mean, like the fact that doesn't crush him, right? Like you'd think like, I don't know, because he really does hang all of his hope upon this doctor at the very end, and yet Guido, there's nothing that gets him until those final bullets at the very end, if you think about it, right? And because we're now in kind of like the last 10 minutes as we begin to wrap up, like maybe this is a good place to sort of end, just to reflect on like the hope and the resilience and the fact that, Guido in particular, right, is just this like this unshakable character who faces doors that slam in his face, who faces or sort of dead ends, and yet all of these things that we've been talking about, the love, the relationality, his devotion to his family, and his ability to sacrifice, like he just continues to persevere and doing everything that he can. Like he's constantly being crafty, right? I mean, he's so clever in the midst of these binds that he finds himself in. He's so quick-witted. I mean, he's constantly figuring out ways to survive and constantly being resilient in the face of apparent hopelessness.
The economy of God, constantly.
Always to quote Ian Malcolm from Jurassic Park, right? Life finds a way. And
say it right.
I can't do it. You do it.
Do your best, Jeff Goldblum. Come on.
Yes. Life.
That's it.
Finds a way.
Thank you.
You just have to stammer a little bit. That's really all it is.
And also be very tall. You also have to be very, very tall.
Yeah.
What really stood out to me though about the resilience of Guido was, it seems to me like, I think a lot of times we talk about how suffering or difficulties might be the thing that purifies us. It might be the sort of like where we sort of learn these difficult lessons, but I don't know if that's actually true. I think the way it's talked about in scripture is actually it's what reveals what's already there. And for me, that was what this story really showed well. Like I don't know if the concentration camp was the thing that made Guido a person who could resist the darkness or who was filled with this eternal joy. It was that was what he had cultivated, such that when he faced darkness, he could be a light in it, that he wasn't overcome by it. And I think that was something I really took up. As I was watching it today, honestly, I realized like you actually aren't in the concentration camp till after halfway through the film. More than half of the film is life before that darkness comes, and who he is and who he's cultivating himself to be. I don't know. You don't see a lot of like maybe the cultivation part, but for me, that was like what the message that I got was like, I need to cultivate a trust in God. I need to be the person who has eyes to see and ears to hear, who's abiding in joy and peace, so that no matter what happens, I'm not shaken, that's where I turn, that's where I look. That was something really powerful for me in the story.
Yeah. To be the sort of person who can use these dark moments as opportunities, right? That reveal the depth of character and reveal the trust. They become kind of like the arena for these right. Postures, these virtues that we've developed, right? To really show themselves.
Right. Like fall in love now. Like,
it's easy.
You fall in love before you get married, and then marriage is its own kind of, I don't know, its own kind of crucible. Is that the right word? I'm not sure if that's the right word I want. But place of purification. But you fall in love first so that you can be committed to whatever comes in the context of I don't know, the difficulties.
Yeah. Because that's who you are, right? Like even to Dora, right? Like why did she make this difficult choice? Because that's who she was, right? And what she did flowed from who she was.
You know, I think that like, I just hit my thing. You know, like the human spirit is so resilient, and like we're so capable of so much. And I think that like the ascetic practice of the church, right, is like geared to, I think, to draw this out of us in a really powerful and practical way if we let it. But you know, we've talked about this, you and I, before, Steve, like just the idea, right, of ascesis, like the word itself like means nothing more than training, right? Like it's a training, it's a practice, it's a
practice.
It's in the way that I've thought about this, right, is like it's not the game though, right?
Yeah.
Like if I was going to be a baseball player, right, my job is to play baseball. Like that's my job. My job is not to go to baseball practice, right? And if I'm going to be effective in the game, I should go to practice and like be able to do those things and kind of be able to put myself in a place of like knowing the drills, knowing how to field a ball, knowing how to hit a ball, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I need batting practice, I need fielding practice, all of this kind of stuff. To me, there is this kind of like reality of the ascetic practices of the church that they're instructive for us. They become practice for us in a way of helping us know, like, it's okay to be inconvenienced, right? You're not that special. You're going to die, right? Like these are important lessons that the church lovingly should teach us. That like, you know, you're not like, I don't know, you're not the center of the world. You know, like, and so if you're not the center of the world and you're going to die one day and you're really not that special, then like, it's probably okay if you're inconvenienced every now and then, right? That like things don't really go your way. And I think in this last year, right, like I feel like I've seen and experienced even in myself, like this kind of entitlement to like believing that things should go my way. And kind of like, that's like the general way of things. Like people are like anti this and anti that and anti whatever. And there's this almost inability to be inconvenienced by things in the culture at large. And like, it's really you know, like upsetting to me that I have that in me myself. And I'm sympathetic, you know, absolutely. But it's wild to me to like think about like if any of us were put in concentration camps. You know, like, I mean, people have referred to like, you know, I've seen this and heard this, like people referring to health inspectors as like Gestapo and like Nazis. And then like I watched this movie and I'm like, oh, those are actual Nazis and actual Gestapo, right? Like, okay, so maybe just being told I can't wear a mask and gather in groups of more than 50 for the next like year or two, like maybe isn't Gestapo and like Nazi stuff. Like maybe it is. I don't know. I'm not personally, I'm not too worried about it because as we've seen, like things are opening up again. People are going back to church and like all of that happened. So it turned out everything was okay. Right. Just like I thought it would be. But anyway, it seems to me that like there's so much reactivity to like the circumstances that are around us that like we fail to even think about what kind of personhood we want to cultivate in ourselves, right? Like, do I really want to be the kind of person who can't be inconvenienced? Do I really want to be the kind of person who doesn't know how to die well? Do I really want to be the kind of person? I mean, because like Dora, right? Like she could have been like, that's not fair. Like get them off of there. Like this is not right. And like it's their, like they should not be. And it's, I don't even have to, but she willingly goes on there herself, right? For like giving up her rights altogether. And to me, like when I read the lives of the saints, that's the witness of the martyrs. Like that's the witness of the saints, right? They're not like, how could you do this to me, you oppressive government? And how could you, whatever. They're like, well, I have no king but Christ. So if you want to kill me, it doesn't really matter because like, I'm already a citizen in his kingdom. So, you know, peace to the world, right? Like whatever, I'm out, like, it's fine. But we're like, oh, you know, like masks are going to make kids into demons and things like that. And like that's, I don't get it. I just don't get it. I'm sorry. Like I don't get it.
Well, I think this connects this like resilience piece with what we were talking about at the very beginning, like this beauty first sort of ethic, right? Because I'm even thinking, for whatever reason, Paul in Ephesians, I think, comes to mind, right? When he makes these very difficult, which are sometimes misinterpreted. He's even like, slaves be obedient to your masters and so forth and so on. And sometimes people think like, oh, Paul is endorsing slavery or whatever it is. Like, no, he's not. There's other letters where he writes to people who have slaves and he sort of encourages them like, hey, you to be a Christian, you shouldn't have slaves. But what he's like trying to encourage in these people, which is something that is a challenge for all of us as well, is again, to be the sort of people who can like develop a heart that is capable of perceiving light and beauty in even the most difficult of situations, right? Which starts with like when things are easy, right? To use Christina's metaphor, right? It's like developing love when you're still in the honeymoon period, as opposed to, when things get like rough and real later on. And that's where that true resilience sort of comes from, right? There's resilience in being a person who seeks beauty. There's a resilience in being a person who sees beauty. There's a resilience in being a person who focuses on one's own sins, right? And kind of like it has a posture of repentance first rather than complaint first. And this becomes a challenge for us because like I'm completely a person of entitlement and I'm completely a person of grumpiness. And like, I have bad days and I can't think of what it would like to be a Guido who has like a bad months. We don't even know how, like, I've never experienced anything as bad as a concentration camp. And yet he's so much more of a human being than I am. So much more of a human being. I'm going to say it that way, a human being. And, maybe this becomes like a really nice way to end the season because it becomes this challenge to just seek beauty and be human.
Yeah.
And maybe if it's okay then too, before we kind of like maybe close out the episode itself, as we close the season of Pop Culture Coffee Hour, like it's funny because this morning my wife got an email that was like this, reflection of all days from Viktor Frankl, who was an actual survivor of the Holocaust, right? Like, and we were getting ready to, she knew we were doing this and she was like, I can't believe this came in my email today. But would it be okay maybe if I close out this part of our conversation by quoting him at length, kind of in regards to this whole idea of like resiliency and kind of becoming the kind of people that find beauty?
Yeah, do it.
The experiences of camp life show that humanity does have a choice of action. There were enough examples, often of a heroic nature, which proved that apathy could overcome, irritably suppressed. Humanity can preserve a vestige of spiritual freedom, of independence of mind, even in such terrible conditions of psychic and physical stress. We who lived in concentration camps can remember the people who walked through the huts comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a person but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Even though conditions such as lack of sleep, insufficient food, and various mental stresses may suggest that the inmates were bound to react in certain ways, in the final analysis, it becomes clear that the sort of person the prisoner became was the result of an inner decision and not the result of camp influences alone. Fundamentally, therefore, any person can, even under such circumstances, decide what shall become of them, mentally and spiritually. They may retain their human dignity, even in a concentration camp. It is this spiritual freedom which cannot be taken away that makes life meaningful and purposeful. And we might even say beautiful. The way in which a person accepts their fate and all the suffering it entails, the way in which they take up their cross, gives them ample opportunity, even under the most difficult circumstances, to add a deeper meaning to their life. It may be brave, dignified, and unselfish. Or, in the bitter fight for self-preservation, they may forget their human dignity and become no more than an animal. Here lies the chance for a person either to make use of or to forego the opportunities of attaining the moral values that a difficult situation may afford them. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves.
That's powerful stuff. That's powerful
Oh,
stuff.
Victor.
Yeah.
Well
He's
said,
onto
Vic.
something.
Well said, Vicky.
Victor. Yeah. It occurs to me that we never really decided on a way to end this episode. We never kind of really decided on the last segment. So I'm okay giving Viktor Frankl the last word
Mhm.
on the season, to be totally honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. This was good.
Well,
This is nice to focus on beauty at the end of the season, at the end of like a rather crazy 14 months in our lives and in the society's life. But I don't know. God is good. Christ is risen, and life remains beautiful. So,
Yeah. Thanks, guys. This was fun.
Me.
This was a good
This was great.
episode.
I look
hope-
forward to troubleshooting our technical issues again in 2 or 3 months when we do this again.
It's so fun to be all together. I will try not to be a pain in everyone's, but next time.
please don't use that word on the air.
This is a family show.
We try to cater to all kinds of people, especially but not limited to Italians.
We're gonna get an email from an advocacy group after this episode. This is just like
We've been flagged for sure. I've been flagged.
Let's be honest, Christian, you were flagged way before this episode.
That's fine. That's fine. I really do love Super Mario Brothers. That is one of my favorite games. So I can't possibly be racist. And I eat pizza whenever I get a chance.
How do I shut this thing off?
Some of my favorite meatballs are Italian. I also like meatballs of the Swedish variety. It's fine. My love of meatballs is inclusive of all cultures.
That's
We
what,
went from Viktor Frankl to
Emma, what did you expect?
that's true. I knew what I signed up for.
something about the last 30 seconds, I think, is the ethos of Pop Culture Coffee Hour in a nutshell.
We just talked about Nazis for an hour and a half. I'm desperate for meatballs at this point. Like, forget the Nazis. On to the meatballs.
Well, may all your meatballs be tasty. I have no idea. I don't know how to transition from that to the end. Maybe we just say bye.
Bye.
That.